vous êtes ici pour les bières gratuites. J'ai des petites nouvelles pour vous. Les Nations Unies nous ont dit que le service de traiteur n'est plus disponible, donc on n'aura pas de happy hour. Okay, if you're here for the free beers, I have sad news for you. It's not a happy hour anymore, it's called a sad hour. Because we're not going to have any beers. The UNFCCC said they had some catering issues and they're not able to bring beers. So thanks for being here and thanks for joining us for this conversation. My name is William. I am the Director of Implementation for the Canadian Coalition for Green Healthcare and the Chair of the Northern Council for Rural Cooperation. And this is my fourth year organizing this panel at a COP. So we started in Egypt at 27. And at the time, gays were being tracked on Grindr by the Egyptian police and brought to jail. And I felt like we really needed to host this discussion. And I even tried to smuggle some hockey pride tape in the venue in Egypt, and I forgot about it. Yeah, I chickened out at the last minute, so this is why I'm here. And then I COP28, which was in Dubai, thank you. We did the same thing, which was also a country where gay rights are not optimal, I would say. And I really enjoyed that discussion as well. And then there was Azerbaijan, same thing. Gay rights are pretty poor. And when I'm in Canada, I'm not a proud Canadian, but when I'm abroad, I'm very proud to be Canadian and very glad to be having this passport. And now Brazil, completely different story. I think gay rights here are not as good as home, but pretty good, and homosexuality is often celebrated. And so with that, I would like to introduce you to this lovely panel with Kat Abreu, Jody Hong, Parul Kanwar, and Diego De Leon. Diego and Parul joins us for a previous iteration of this conversation, so I look forward to seeing how that has changed. And I'll start with looking at my phone for my first question. What's your stories? How has your queer identity shaped your climate action? We know that as queer folks, we're often experiencing more bullying or intimidation, and that can give us courage when facing a minister in life. And so I'd love to start with you, Kat. What's your story of queerness and climate action?
Thanks so much, Bill, and thanks for all your leadership in organizing these conversations. I think in these spaces we often think about making so much of our identity visible, but this is my 10th COP. I've been following the Paris Agreement the whole time, and in my experience of being in climate spaces, while people tend to talk about various elements of their identity, it's quite rare that people actually talk about being queer. And I think you, with this panel, and also the growing group of folks that connect over our lovely WhatsApp chat, and the growth in amazing queer leadership organizations working on climate and queer personalities leading on climate. Many of you who are in the space, it's so wonderful to see all the new friends. Bringing that visibility is really powerful. So what's my story? I often talk about my beginnings as an activist. It was in third grade when I organized my class into a letter writing campaign. So I was an activist from the very beginning, and I got into climate change activism in university when I took my first climate science course. I also knew that I was queer very young. My first kiss was with a lovely woman named Sarah, a young girl named Sarah. We were 5. And then my second kiss was with my next door neighbor Michael when we were 7. So, at a very young age, I knew that I was going to be an activist, and I knew that I was a queer person. I mean, maybe I didn't put it in those terms, but I, had these things to figure out, and I think that I spent a lot of my young life figuring those things out together. And, it is true that we as queer people can sometimes face adverse experiences, disproportionately adverse experiences. I think it's also true that because we grow up in societies that don't necessarily give us images of ourselves, don't necessarily say, you know, this is the kind of person that you could be. We often have to do that searching ourselves to find the expression of our true identities. And that, the development, I think, of that self-reflection, the emotional intelligence, the courage that it takes to find that true expression of ourselves actually lends itself beautifully to activism. And I found that not only have I been able to bring that kind of deep reflection, courageous self-expression, a willingness to say what needs to be said, even when it makes people uncomfortable, because that is my truth and I believe it and stand firmly in it. I mean, what else could an activist ask for? And then the other things I would say is it's always the queer people who are bringing the fashions and brightening up our spaces with color and great accessories, and we have the most fun. So I think I plan pretty good parties at every COP. And thank you. And you know what? I see queer people around me all over in my organizing spaces, and that, you know, it's wonderful to see that community, and for that to be a part of the community building that we do as activists working on climate together.
Okay, so the bar is set. Kat Abreu, thank you so much. We'll move down to Jody. What's your story of queerness and climate action?
I love you started with queer fashion, Kat, because I said to Pearl as we were getting dressed today, I was like, I hope everyone can tell I'm wearing this suit in a queer way and not in a corporate way. My climate and queerness story went pretty hand in hand. I would say I wasn't as lucky, maybe as bad as to figure it out so young. I really discovered both in adulthood. So 10 years ago, I was graduating from engineering, and I, through the program, really got funneled actually into a career in oil and gas. Had a boyfriend at the time, felt unhappy in both circumstances, and I really thought that I could, at the time, change the system from within. I wanted to work on methane emission reduction and wastewater treatment and remediation and things that are still important, but I felt so dissatisfied in so many ways with what I was able to achieve. I was like, you know what? The superpower that I think all queer people have is to reimagine how can the system work? What are the options available to us? And I said, no, I don't want to do either of these anymore. So I changed into low carbon district energy with a really great company in Vancouver. From there, I've gone on to nonprofit work with Iron and Earth and also some consulting work. And I started dating women and have a really lovely partner who also works in a climate space. And I think my career and my queerness really have just progressed over time. They keep getting more and more intense. I can't wait to see where they take me in another 10 years.
Thank you so much. So from oil and gas, being a straight woman, into climate action and dating women. So I think it's a pretty good transition.
Canada, if I can do it, you can do it too.
Baru.
Oh, hi, Lar.
I would say, I think for me, it kind of started with a little bit of fear. When I was younger, I very much was told that you cannot be queer and you are not the kind of person who can work in climate change. So it all started very morbidly. But I think over time, I kind of realized through my communities and people I speak to me that that's not quite the case. And I could kind of like be queer into work in climate change because that was something I started getting really passionate about from a very young age. And then eventually I ended up working in politics where being one of the only queer people I ended up getting queer file. And okay, there you go. So they gave me the LGBTQ plus file because there was a lot of stuff happening around it. And I also ended up getting the environmental protected areas file and the energy and minerals file. And more recently, I think I just saw all the things around the world that are happening both in terms of like queer spaces and in terms of the environment. And governments are taking a lot more liberties with the rights of both people and environment, like in Canada. A right to a healthy environment is not a constitutionally or like a charter protected right. No Supreme Court decision has ever affirmed. But we do have rights to equality and rights to life, liberty, security, and we're being infringed. So it really makes me concerned about the rights to our climate or our environment. And I think I just have like, I've reached a point where I don't want to go back to where I cannot work on these things and where I have to pretend I don't care about these things and refuse to go back. So now we're here and we're going to keep working on this for as long as I can.
Thank you so much. We'll come back to you. I think we have enough more to share. Thanks for being here. Diego, I can't possibly imagine that none of us have been hearing the earworms coming out of New York recently with the election of Baku. What's your climate story?
So thank you very much, William, for having us and my fellow colleague panelists. So a little bit of my story. So I'm from Mexico, born and raised, and I'm from a city. It's 4 million people. It's a city called Guadalajara, but we say it's a town because it's very conservative and everybody knows each other. And, but they also say that if gay men had wings, Guadalajara would never see the sun. So it's a weird city in the sense that there is a lot of queerness, but there's also a very religious Catholic community. So I grew up very closeted and just because of the lack of representation back in the 90s and not seeing in mainstream media people that look like me or that think like me. I just didn't, at some point I didn't even know like gay men. And then growing up I went to college and that's when I met gay people and I was like, oh, there's more out there and they're fun and they're amazing. To all my queer and trans friends that I met in college and getting to know them, get their stories and then that's when I accepted myself and came out. And then the environmental side, my mom is an environmental economist, so I always grew up knowing externalities and all those concepts. And but then in 2019 when I was working for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Mexico in the climate area, and it was the second climate summit hosted by the Secretary General, and it was all about the climate ambition and what are we going to do for the Paris Agreement and all that. And I made the question like, where are the queer voices? And that led me to find and look, and I found a community in college. Then I found a community of queer people that were doing climate, and just became kind of part of my identity. And that's where I am today. Found that position.
Thank you so much. Now I'd love to talk about queer superpowers. So I remember coming out, I feel like you need to take a leap of faith and believe in yourself. And I feel like this feeling I also have sometimes looking at climate action if you're emailing a minister and you need to just make a statement, and that's kind of the same feeling sometimes as like coming. So what are queer superpowers that apply to climate work as well? That's not an easy question. We'll start with Cass.
I love this question. I mean, it's hard for me not to say that my current superpower is finding the best party wherever it might be, which feels like a really important skill to have when you do an intense job that often forces you into existential crises, and you need to party to like feel the edge of life feeling you. So I do think that's part of it. But the one that I landed on when I was considering this question that you suggested we prepare was community building. I've spent my career building and helping to run networks and coalitions networks and coalitions are a core part of my theory of change. I think change is all about relationships, and networks and coalitions are where we as a movement institutionalize those relationships that are required for change over the long term. And I think that as queer people, finding our community is so often a part of our journey. Figuring out who we belong to, who we see ourselves in, who we want to move through the world together with, and not just finding those folks that we are able to build community with, but also sticking together, finding each other wherever we go, and figuring out how we can together make the world a better place, make the world look more like the world that we want to be living in. I see just so much alignment between that community building work that I do in my professional life and that community building work that I do with my queer community. And I think that that is a huge superpower. And when I think about the other queer people that I work with in the climate world, I was just doing this exercise earlier today, and all of them are incredible community builders.
Thank you so much. Jody, you went through engineering school, where it's usually quite male-heavy. So what, doing that has taught you about your queer superpowers?
I love this question. Okay, so yes, totally. I started engineering school 15 years ago, so really not a lot of women in the program at that time. I was in chemical engineering, so we did have the highest amount, but that highest amount was like 20%, like really low. And I heard from chemical engineers who are graduating today that it's much higher, over 50%, which I think is such a win, so incredible. But I think my career journey taught me so much in this, in the sense that, one, you really learn that if someone in front of you doesn't agree with you, to keep going anyway. When you've had your family or your friends or your workplaces not understand you, disagree with you, even maybe turn against you, it really teaches you that inner resilience to keep going in what you believe in and what you want to do with your life, no matter what. And I think that is such a strength. I also think that when I started dating women, and I think this is a skill that everyone of all genders and all sexualities should learn, is to decenter men. And if you haven't heard that term before, I really implore you to look it up before you make any assumptions about what it means. But as a female engineer, I have to go onto these work sites, and I'm often the only female, sometimes the only person of color, sometimes the only queer person, many, many more things. And I have to find the confidence in myself to say, okay, what I think what I'm doing is important here. And I had to decenter other people in order to raise myself up. And I really, really urge you to look into that if you haven't, for everybody.
Thank you for that. Can I just ask the folks on here to make sure that the GoPro doesn't move too much, so that the people online are not too dizzy? Thank you so much. Parul, your partner has transgender care in Alberta under the Smith government.
Oh.
Do you want to go there?
Yes, my partner is trans, and we recently actually moved out of Alberta to BC because a lot of the things that the government is doing. So the Alberta government introduced 3 separate bills attacking trans education, with education just in general, where they're coming up with kids for like pronouns, name changes, adapting healthcare, especially for trans youth, and also the participation of trans women in sports. Because why do one thing when you can ruin all things? And we assume that this coming Monday, the government will be introducing another bill that's probably going to be a notwithstanding clause, because all 3 of these bills, as you might guess, violate a lot of charter rights. And it's kind of an anticipation that this Monday they'll be introducing the notwithstanding clause to begin continue doing what they are doing and harming all the people that they are harming for whatever political gain that might come their way. And I recognize that this is not the right choice for everybody. Not everybody can just up and leave their home. Like not everybody has this opportunity. And I think there's a lot of, I think that there's so much happening, there's so much noise, because this is not the only thing that the government is doing. They're also working towards like mining agreements. They're also opening up the Water Act to allow more water for oil and gas, even though they have not opened that act for years and years and years, while indigenous communities have been living without access to clean water. So we really see where the priorities of this government are, and because there's so much noise and there's so much happening at the same time, it's really hard to find the energy and the strength to show up for everything all of the time. And I think that I would say is one of the queer superpowers is, I think queer people always show up. And I think it's a recognition that none of these fights are like isolated. What is being impacted in the environment is going to impact people's lives, and what's happening in people's lives and their health care is going to impact their environment. And I think the recognition of that as a whole, that at least in my opinion, I feel like a lot of queer people hold very close to their heart, their intersectionality, a lot of these things. I think is a superpower. Also, just to add on Joe's point, a friend of mine once told me just walk into a room with the audacity of a mediocre man, and I think ever since I started trying to do that, I think that has also I would consider that as a superpower as well.
Sorry to box. I think when you shared the question, Will, I think a lot of things came to mind. But I think that, and especially, just to I currently live in the U.S. From Mexico, but I currently live in the U.S. in New York, and given the current political climate, I think it's important to remember that diversity is a superpower. Like the fact that leads to issues of empathy, it leads to being able to identify those different intersectionalities of, queer indigeneity, queer blackness, queer Latinx, like all those different, there is actually what connects us is our queerness, but there's also beauty and power in diversity and bringing different talents to the table. If we were all the same, we would hardly be able to, and I think we're here at COP where we have representation from every country in the world, and that helps us understand the magnitude of climate change is a challenge. Like it's not, we need to understand what's happening to small island regular states as well as communities that live in the top of the mountain. And because of that, we're able to develop solutions that really, are able to address those different elements of how, in fact, like climate change, like I always say, who knows, the climate change impacts us all, but impacts us differently. We need to acknowledge that. And that's through diversity.
Thank you, Diego. Yeah, diversity is really important. So I know I'm the moderator, but I'm also going to share a story. A couple weeks ago, I was moderating this event in Toronto, and a great friend of mine was a keynote speaker at the end, Dr. Courtney Howard, and I was tasked with introducing her. So, what a privilege to introduce a close friend. And so I do a regular introduction. I say, she's president of so-and-so, she does this and that, and then I say, they say that behind every great man stands a great woman. But in her case, because we work so closely together, I say, well, behind every great woman stands a homosexual. And we had great fun doing that. And I feel like if I am trying to convince a group, often women, who don't know much about me, it will be much easier for me to get my way in a meeting if I make a point of coming in. Because all of a sudden, they're no longer threatened. And yeah, I think that's just quite it's kind of an easy one actually. And yeah, so that's just, it is about, yeah, exactly. So, yeah. Next, we'll move on. So how do we facilitate integration and diversity? And I think it's often an afterthought. I think we need it. I think it's like democracy. We need to like always pursue it, otherwise it's going to count. How do we integrate folks and make sure that we always have representation at the table?
Yeah, I mean, this is like a constant question in this world, right? And a part of how we do that, kind of formally, at least in this space, here we are at a conference of the parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, is through constituencies. And I'm actually really looking forward to hearing from you, Diego, on the efforts that you guys have been making with the gender constituency to have a queer bloc recognized within that. And that feels really exciting for me as someone who, you know, has kind of for many years been sitting in rooms where constituencies get up and speak, and I'm moved to be seeing different communities expressing themselves in this space, but then I'm often feeling like, oh, where are my queer people at? Even though I know so many of us are here. So I do think those kinds of formal avenues are one of those ways that we do that. And then, you know, part of why I love working in networks and coalitions is because it really challenges you to move past the conceptions of power that you've been taught to have when you like look at the world. And I think a lot of us get stuck in when we're like trying to do a political analysis in order to develop our strategies, we can get really stuck in a pretty like patriarchal, heteronormative understanding of power. But when you're building coalitions and networks to make change, you understand that distributed power is where it's at. That you can find power in so many different iterations, in so many different places, and that people really do build and feel so much of their power based on who they are, where they come from, and who they're in community with. And I'm a biologist by academic training, so I believe strongly that there's resilience in diversity. And when building networks and coalitions, what I think of is really trying to build the most diverse ecosystem that I can, because those are the most powerful and resilient ecosystems. And so that includes, for me, including queer people in the conversation, as well as people from other walks of life, and understanding that that is actually where the power comes from, rather than these very normative structures of power that I think we're often taught and asked to work within regularly in our professional spaces. So kind of breaking past that is a huge part of this. Yeah, in the lead up to this, Will, you like kind of asked me to think about, you know, who are some of the major queer climate leaders, and I didn't have, while I have so many like queer climate heroes personally, I didn't necessarily come up with a huge amount of names, right? We've got Rob Jetten in the Netherlands, Environment and Climate Change Minister, maybe the next leader of the Netherlands who's openly queer. Our friend, I think many of us, Isaiah, queer brown vegan on Instagram. Patagonia, who I actually think you kind of look alike. Have you been told that before? Yes. Who's this incredible, outdoor advocate, climate advocate, drag queen. You know, so these are some of the personalities that come to mind, but I think it's true that we're still in a place where, and you know, this is probably for a variety of reasons, whether people are just keeping their information personal, or if they just feel uncomfortable, or just because it's not normalized for us to be out in our workspaces. That I think slowly but surely, part of that process of ensuring that diversity is actually us getting to a place where many of us are feeling at ease being out in our workplaces.
Thank you. Jody, I remember going through engineering school that I was mostly hanging out with a bunch of bros, and I did not connect with any of them through those 5 years. How would you include this as a lesbian woman?
I can grow up. I can do it. I grew up in Edmonton, Alberta. I've learned the skills. I can do it. And I think it took me time to gain the confidence to also be myself within those walls and not just conform to what I thought the girls wanted of me. I think, I have so many thoughts in this conversation also that just happened, if I can bring them into this as well, if that's okay. I think as queer people, we're really good at extending the olive branches or the bridges to other people in our own community. We all might identify with different letters, but we all support each other and we build those bridges to whatever identities, however people want to show up. So we're so open to that, and I think that that's an amazing way to start building diversity, not just within the queer community, but also outside of it. I do a lot of work with rural, remote, indigenous communities for renewable energy and community engagement and training. And I think that we, as a queer community, are so skilled in finding privilege, observing privilege, other people's, but also our own, and seeing the places where we do have power, and we can share that power and give that power away and extend those hands. And I think that representation and mentorship are huge in those areas. Finding people that are like you, look like you, whatever that may be. I think that's such an important way of bringing it in. And I think now that I've become who I am, gained confidence, being out and proud, the way that I grow out is very different. I'm not afraid to call you out. I'll sit with you and maybe we'll have a beer, but I will tell you exactly what I think, whereas I think a younger, more positive version of me wouldn't have been so bold. So I think it's still important I like to call it the bubble and the bridge. What are you in need of right now? Do you need your queer bubble, your queer spaces where everything is soft and held and regenerating and nurturing? Or have you gathered that strength and you're ready to be the bridge to go out into the world and be that point of representation, that point of conflict, and then also bring that level of mentorship and bringing other people up with you, queer or otherwise. I hope that answered your question. I went on a tangent.
Thank you. Alright.
I think in my mind there's two aspects to this. The first one being, I think, especially in workplaces, making it kind of like putting the pressure on the organization to create a space for their queer employees, as opposed to the other way around where the queer employee has to like kind of fight and work towards like having that kind of like acceptance and space. So this is actually small plug, but the work I do with Aloe Equity is kind of focused on that. It's the first trans-led organization in Toronto that works with employers to make sure that their practices are not only sustainable but equitable to all individuals, including their queer employees. And the second, I would say, is kind of just like showing up and like being present, because not to be depressing and taking back to politics, but there's so many elections and things like that where you see that people will kind of not talk about queer issues because they feel like, oh, this is going to lose us this election and this is going to lose us this riding and those votes. But more often than not, you see people lose those ridings and elections and votes anyway. So you'll end up compromising on your values and on the things that make you who you are as an individual, as a party, as an organization. You end up where you would have ended up anyway. And I just think that it's something, one of those things where we can learn from history and we can grow. I think like that's why Soran Lange's campaign in New York was super exciting, because not once did he walk back from his commitment to queer and trans New Yorkers at any point, and we can see that like progress can still happen, and We don't have to shut ourselves away and be less than who we are to get there. And there's ways to do that, and I think we should keep exploring those as much as we can in whatever capacity we can, because I don't think the same strategy is going to work in every scenario, but that doesn't mean we stop trying. So if that makes any sense.
Thank you. Completely agree. Particularly on when I got the question, the for me the best form of inclusion is explicit inclusion. So I am working more throughout sustainability on the policy side, and something my pet peeve of something that bothers me a lot is when we're bundled into vulnerable communities, marginalized communities, and because our population experiences differentiated types of discrimination, and in some cases it's legal or criminalized. Like, it's not, other groups do not necessarily face that in the magnitude or the scale, and this is not an issue. I think when we talk about this, we think that, countries in the African continent or Southeast Asia, but the US is happening. Like, the criminalization of particularly trans people is real, and therefore we need to be explicitly mentioned in the policies and in the legal instruments so that we can ensure and demand our protection, and that also recognizes our contributions to the development, in this case to fighting climate change or whatever other social or environmental issue that we're trying to tackle. And just to finalize, and I wanted to get to the point of good examples, and in this last 2 years we had a couple of victories that I want to share with the public. One was precisely using census data from the US and the National Poll Census, it was designed to identify the impacts of COVID on the US population, but then they segregated the data by sexual orientation and gender identity. And then in order to identify whether it was the effect of COVID, they also looked at extreme weather events. So we had, for the first time, we had national level data on displacement by soggy and by tornado, hurricane, fire, or flood. And when we run the regression, we found that Black trans people were facing 2 to 4 times more permanent displacement than the cis heterosexual counterparts, and that's not acceptable. So the team took the study to the California legislation, and happy to say that now California law says that for the state disaster risk preparedness plan, it's mandated by law that it needs to consult the LGBTQ+, and it needs to include safeguards for the LGBTQ+. So that was and we hope that we can serve as a model for other states. And then the other, and this is very, very exciting, is, and I get chills, we work very closely with the Mexican government, and their NDC is still not public in the website. It will be, they promised me it's going to be before Monday when the minister comes. But we work with them, and using this data, they included, so their NDC is both mitigation and adaptation and loss and damage and transversal issues. And they included a whole section of actions for the LGBTQ+, not marginalized communities, not vulnerable, for the LGBTQ+, and women and indigenous and people with disabilities. And they promised to increase their efforts, or they're committed to increase their efforts on disaggregating data and addressing the specific needs of LGBTQ+ when being impacted by flood. And for my engineering colleagues, they also on finding ways that the LGBTQ+ indigenous people and women are beneficiaries or are included in the green transition, and that they can or take down the potential barriers that they're trying to understand more on that, but the potential barriers on how do they participate on the energy transition. So we're excited about that.
Congratulations, Presidente Sheinbaum. Now the next question is just a yes or no answer. Okay, from all the panelists, just yes or no. Do you think that the fact that Trump and so many right-wing politicians are talking about trans rights, and do you think this is a distraction from climate and other issues that are pressing?
No.
That's not what I was expecting.
Yes. Yes, with an asterisk.
I was also thinking yes, but now I'm very curious.
Yeah, I'm very. Kat, you have to expand.
So, okay. So your question is this a distraction from the work that we're trying to
From climate, from housing, like more pressing issues.
like? How is it a distraction? Like
No, sorry, I'm saying, is our right-wing politicians talking about trans folks?
Oh, I see. Okay, I misunderstood the question.
Okay, all right.
Got it. I was like, why are we on a different page here?
And with that, I'd love to jump to a Q&A. I see lots of folks who were on this panel in previous years. Do you have questions? What would you like to talk about? We have a couple minutes for questions. And Hugo is going to be passing around a microphone. I see Shaliza has her hand up. Shaliza is the co-chair of the Canadian Association of Pharmacy for the Environment.
Thank you so much, Will. And I just wanted to thank the entire panel because this is, this is my second COP, and I don't think I have seen this kind of incredible vulnerability and courage and just amazing diversity that is being shown. And I personally learned a lot from this panel as well. So I'm a pharmacist. I've been a pharmacist for 15 years, and I've been in planetary health for about 5, and before that in global health. And so from my mind, I'm thinking about, okay, what can we do to try to improve equity in this area related to this field. One thought that I had and had spoken about previously, somebody had given me this idea as well about lenacapavir. You're basically looking at prophylaxis, and when you're able to get an injection twice a year, instead of having to have treatment on, like prophylactic treatment on a regular basis, even issues with regards to evacuation, for example, with regards to access to medications, become a little bit easier. So I have 2 questions. The first is, do you see medication-related climate resilience concerns something that is forefront in this particular area? And number 2, I guess I really liked your comments about networks and how do you, I'm learning a lot about advocacy, so how do you bring people together from a network perspective, and how can pharmacy-based organizations support in this area?
Just to the first question, I think it's very important, and there is data on it. A lot of it's anecdotal. It's not, you won't find a big survey about it, but key facts is a lot of relief services are faith-based organizations which have a set of principles, and the other is just lack of awareness and not necessarily tied to anything. It's just lack, and that's why the importance, for example, of consultations and asking the LGBTQ people, what do you need? Two very important things are usually missing from the basic medical assistance is hormonal replacement therapy, which again it's critical for trans, but for the trans population, but also for women in menopause, also for mothers recovering. Like it's not again, and it's because they just haven't asked women, right? Also. And HIV treatment, which, as you know, the particularly gay population has higher rates, prevalence rate of HIV, and they just don't include that. And those are very simple changes that you can introduce in disaster relief services that you know it can have a very positive impact. And on networks and to the question, I think. So, and I want to shout out to my colleague Alex, who's here in the audience from the WGC, who we worked together in establishing this queer intersectionality group within the WGC. And where I'm going with this is that helps us bring different voices of queer people from different parts of the world, and they bring different challenges that we need to address collectively. So the power of networks is just having that vision, because you know, we face challenges, but we also have sort of privilege, and where it's again, it's not, and I try to be positive and not think that it's because we don't want to know. We just sometimes don't know things, but we need someone that has lived through that. Those lived experiences are very valuable to bring that, and I see that's the value of networks.
Can I add to that?
Yeah.
I think also the medical area and queer people have had at times a fraught relationship. And so I think anything that can be done to build trust in that, whether that's training in queer healthcare for any healthcare providers, the more that we can do to make that a comfortable space for queer people, means they're more likely to come back for anything else, including vaccines, including when they're sick. And so training the people that are in that space that will be directly working with the queer community on how to make that comfortable, I think can elevate healthcare in so many other ways and empower our journalists.
That's such an important point, and I actually think pharmacists are often like kind of on the front lines of that relationship, right? Like I as someone who's experienced a number of health issues over the course of my life, like I've so often relied on pharmacists to be giving me advice, you know, in a healthcare system that's imperfect in Canada, where, well, as a woman, I'm constantly being told that I'm making up what I'm experiencing. The amount of times that I've been told that in my life is extreme. And it's often nurses and pharmacists who I will go to and be like, hey, this is what I'm experiencing, and they're always the ones who are like, oh yeah, of course, here's some advice on how to deal with that. So just to say, I do think that, at least in my personal experience, pharmacists have been, for me, like some of the healthcare professionals that I have been able to trust the most, because they've trusted me and my own understanding of my body. But yeah, just wanted to come in on networks. So to expand some of what I said around my theory of change of networks, about it being about relationships and sustaining relationships that you need to sustain over time for change. Here's the thing. When you're talking about institutional change, and that's inevitably what we're talking about when we want to confront the climate crisis, or when we want to confront, you know, structural racism and homophobia and sexism and all the other, you know, ways in which our society and our financial systems are, you know, locked into these inequitable approaches that are both worsening and are at the root cause of climate change. That structural change means that you have to be able to sustain relationships, sometimes past the individuals who hold them. So, you know, if you're trying to change a government, for instance, in the way a government does things, the people who make up that government are going to change sometimes every 4 years, as they do in Canada. If you're an individual working on a particular issue, you're probably not going to be able to do that work for the entirety of your life. Maybe you will, but maybe it will take longer than the entirety of your life to make change on that issue. And so I think networks and coalitions is where we can actually build those institutional relationships that can hold on past the individuals in those institutions changing. And you can kind of bring that interpersonal, relational change making into that institutional level. So that's how I think about the power of networks to make long-term structural change.
Thank you so much, Kat. And while we pass the mic to the next person who might have a question, thank you, Hugo. Shalisa, to your question, so for context, we're talking about lenacapavir, which is an HIV prevention. I think it's also used in treatment, but it's an HIV prevention drug that replaces a daily pill with twice yearly injections, which I think is cheaper. I suspect it's much cheaper for the healthcare system. It has much reduced greenhouse gas emissions. It improves equity for folks. I don't know why we should not do this nationally. Anyways, thanks for the question. Second question?
So, as of recently being a couple years ago, I've become interested in forest conservation, and so I was wondering what advice y'all had for anyone who's queer and looking to be like working partially or like fully in rural areas.
I'm very rural. Yeah, pick a location that has a great airport and get good Wi-Fi. I think it's entirely possible to do great advocacy work in forestry or any other kind of change making, even if you're not based in an urban center. That being said, I leave Yellowknife like more than once a month. So, yeah, it's a challenge.
I would say not all rural communities are created equal. Find the ones that do have more progressive communities in them. I've heard really good things, for example, about Nelson, BC for queer people, and there's a lot of firefighters and forest conservation efforts in that area. And I would also say, like, find your support network in that town. Even if it's one person can make a whole big difference.
Just to add on what so my example is with Buffalo, Alberta, which is far up north in Alberta. It's an oil and gas town. You wouldn't really, from looking at it from the outside, you wouldn't quite expect what you might find there, but it has a thriving queer community, the Woodlow Pride, does amazing work, and it protects nearby communities as well. So I think I would say go in with a little bit of optimism, but caution as well. I think it's a balancing game, figuring out which communities might work for you, what kind of work specifically within forest conservation you're looking at, and finding that community and building that community. And you never know, more queer people could be coming to wherever you end up being because you're there as well.
Okay, I saw 1 hand, 2, 3, and we have about 6 minutes left. So we're gonna do 2 yes/no questions. Okay.
Hello, thanks so much for this event. Working for a legal organization, NGO, what you said, Diego, about the laws is so critical at the moment of political backlash. when we need to improve and strengthen the laws for future generations, we're seeing like everything rolled back in, and that's in many regions a big threat. And I have a question, yes or no. We released this week a report around the responsibilities of big social media platforms that are spreading dis and misinformation on climate. How do we feel part of the community in terms of, do we want to push more of these social media platforms to regulate and address the systemic risks we have as communities being targeted by these hate campaigns and fake news and false information? Because as we feel they are making the business of disinformation, climate disinformation, I also feel I don't have the evidence, I don't have it, but I feel they are also making the business against our communities with this hate spread on the platform. So yes or no about social media platforms regulation?
Excellent question, Kat.
Okay, you said yes. Can I add a thing? Okay. I find that with mis and disinformation, often part of how it gets through to people is through like a bit of a doorway. And I think a doorway that often gets used is misogyny and heteronormative, cisnormative, patriarchal narratives that then open the door to people receiving a bunch of mis and disinformation on a whole bunch of other issues, including climate.
Yes. I would also say yes, and I've been doing a lot of research around mis and disinformation, specifically around climate and queer identities recently. And I would add, in addition to misogyny, like division within communities, so racialized communities, immigrant communities, queer communities, oil and gas workers, and yes.
Absolutely, yes. And yeah, it's a huge intersection, I think, this information that exists against the LGBT community and the climate community. There's striking similarities that are worth definitely studying more and understanding more.
Thank you so much. I would love to give the opportunity for more questions, but I want to be respectful to the ECCC and the MCI folks who put this event together, this pavilion together. I want to thank ECCC for organizing all of this. I know Canada's not perfect, but I think the folks that are here at COP are doing excellent work. So thank you, Devane, thank you, Jacinthe, and thank you all the others that I'm not going to name. And thank you, Hugo at NCI as well. And I'd love to thank Diego, Parul, Jenny, and Pat for sharing your stories so vulnerably and so openly. And a couple weeks ago, about 10 minutes ago, I popped up on important elements, and I'd love to rectify it today. And so earlier in this panel, I shared a story about something that happened in Toronto, where I was introducing a friend, and I was saying, behind every great man stands a great woman, and behind every great woman stands a homosexual. And Courtney Howard, my great friend here, I forgot her birthday a couple of days ago, so I'd love to, while you are sequestered here in captivity, I'd love to ask you to sing with me Happy Birthday for Courtney Howard. Happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you, happy birthday dear Courtney, happy birthday to you. Thank you so much, everybody. And if you were here for the pre-beers, I have bad news for you. So it was called a happy hour, but it became a sad hour because the UNFCCC catering, I'm not sure what lost some sort of license, and now we're not able to bring beers in here. So if you were here for the pre-beers, I apologize. It is outside of my control and outside of the Pavilion Canada, Canada's Pavilion control. But I encourage you to socialize and ask your friends for your other yes/no questions. Thank you very much for attending.